Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Savannah with the Little Sparkle Barn, and today we're going to be making some beautiful Valentine's Day inspired keychains. We have several different ones that we are making that I'm going to be showcasing within this video. I am going to be tagging everything I use below, so if you enjoy this video and you find it helpful and want to shop the supplies, you can always find that information below. Make sure you subscribe, give it a thumbs up so that you get notified next time we come back and do another tutorial. I would love to give a big shout out to NMO for sponsoring today's video and sending this beautiful glitter, these alcohol inks, and the pigment paste that I use to create these awesome keychains. So if you want to shop with her, make sure you use my link below as well as my discount code so that you get all the fun stuff. And let's go ahead and dive in. All right guys, so today I'm using KS Resin Liquid Art Ultra UV. It is a UV resistant resin that is 10 times more resistant to sun damage than other resins. So that means I can have exposure to sun or UV lighting without my epoxy yellowing over time. I'm also mixing part A and part B equally by volume, stirring until I have a clear consistency. And you'll also see that I am not using a popsicle stick. Stop using popsicle sticks. Popsicle sticks make tons of tiny little air bubbles. So let's just use this metal stir or something similar that's non-porous, and then we can just clean it off and reuse it. So you can see that I have split my epoxy equally into 3 cups, and then I'm going to begin adding my alcohol inks. So these are all NMO Nicole Moret original alcohol inks. Her collection is called Shade. I am using red, which is the shade Blood Moon. I am using gold, which is the shade Teeks. And then I will also be using the shade Hold Up mixed with her water-based pigment paste, which is number 13. Then we're just going to grab our reusable stir, not our popsicle stick, and we're going to gently mix in the color with the epoxy. So as you're doing this, even though I'm speeding it up here, you still want to mix this really slowly so that you get a very thorough consistency and the color completely saturates into the epoxy. Our goal here is not to beat the epoxy up and create additional air bubbles. It's to very gently care for the epoxy, very gently care for the color while making sure that the pigments of the color are completely saturating it. So I'm gonna speed this up because I feel like it can be a bit redundant, but what I did want to tell you with the gold ink, any golds that have like a metallic sheen to them or any alcohol inks that have metallic sheens to them can be a bit tricky to mix, and you're not going to have a very solid consistency. It is going to have a little bit of shading in the pigment. So you'll see that when I'm done mixing the gold, there are kind of like waves in this, and that's totally fine. So I decided that I also wanted to do a custom glitter mix where it is just a little bit of a glitter pour. So I made another 10 milliliters of epoxy, stirred that together, and then I am going to pour in some of the glitters from NMO. Captive Heart is this beautiful red and gold glitter mix. It is a mini chunky mix, and it is just absolutely stunning. Look at how that just shines and expands. Oh, I love it. And then let's add in a bit of a chunky mix. This one is called Blessed, also by NMO. Because I am going to be doing a spacing pour, less is more here. So I don't want to fully saturate the epoxy with glitter. I want there to be spacing in between. This adds a really nice natural look when it is pouring and the epoxy is expanding inside of the design. I let my cups of epoxy sit for about 30 minutes so that they could become more tacky. I have found that when mixing multiple colors of epoxy into one mold, it's best to have this more tacky consistency so that you give yourself time to add those additional colors and there's not a whole lot of run between them. My red is still a bit runny. That's okay. I'm just going to very slowly pour it in a little bit at a time. But my white, probably because the pigment paste is more of a gluey substance, it's become much thicker than my red. So I'm just gonna wipe this off, and then I will pour the gold into the corners. So the gold is a little thicker than the red. It's a little thinner than the white. So of course, with different pigments, you're going to have a different reaction within the epoxy, and they are just curing at different times, which is totally fine. So I'm just going to take my stick and help the gold move into the white because the white did become pretty thick. But this is also going to add a bit of a marbling look to this mold, which I think is actually really pretty. So I'm just taking it in and like putting it along the sides, moving some of the red down, some of the white up, and just kind of stringing it along and then leaving it and allowing it to do its thing. So setting it out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and clean up this workspace and bring in another mold. Let's just go ahead and move through this, see what everything looks like, and play with these colors. Okay, so as soon as I went to pour that white epoxy into the mold, I realized that it was going to come out in like one large clump. So I quickly reached to grab it and it started stringing like cheese on pizza. But I figured I would keep this in the video because guys, this is really what happens when you're crafting and making and doing things like this. Like these are the little things that happen. So thankfully I was almost done and I could just turn around, take my gloves off and reach for my heat gun to start popping some of these air bubbles. So the reason that I want to use a heat gun instead of a torch to pop the bubbles that rise to the top of my epoxy is because I can control how much heat is being dispersed by the heat gun and where that is exactly going. Whereas if I were to use a torch, it could actually start to burn my epoxy and the mold, and that could cause my mold to rip when I'm trying to demold the epoxy art pieces from it. Okay, and finally the moment we've all been waiting for, demolding these beautiful pieces. So the back of this one does have a little bit of that marbling to it, which is amazing, but flipping it over, you can see where it's kind of color blocked. However, Hold Up and Blood Moon mixed together to create some really amazing depth within the red alcohol ink. Absolutely stunning. I'm also obsessed with how Captive Heart and Blessed worked with the epoxy and blended so nicely using the layering technique on this O. It worked very, very well. I'm so excited to get these super glossy and the doming done on them. So I'm just going to speed through demolding the rest of these, but I do want you to notice that I am demolding them very carefully, getting between each of the corners so that I don't actually rip the mold or damage the piece. So I'm breaking out my Dremel to clean up the edges of the keychains. I have the diamond tipped on the end of this instead of the sanding tip, just so I don't damage the corners of any of the pieces. I'm also going to be using my X-Acto knife because sometimes you just don't need a Dremel. Like we don't have to get that serious. So the X-Acto knife comes in handy just to clean away some of those little extra resin pieces that you don't want to break off because you don't want to damage the mold. But if you just cut them cleanly, the mold's going to be absolutely beautiful. And then we're just going to take a piece of sandpaper and rub the front and the back of each one of the keychain shapes. That way we're just completely smoothing it out, getting any extra pieces that don't need to be there off. And if there were any lips on the sides of the keychains where the mold wasn't completely full, the sanding process will help to flatten those out. And then when we dome the pieces, it will be much more fluid and you won't actually see any difference between the piece and the dome top. After the pieces are all nice and clean, we can begin to customize them. So I've cut out a few names, nobody's names in particular, just some names that I thought were really pretty that looked great in the font Lobster. I made all of these in my Cricut design space. Lobster is a font that I personally have on my computer. I believe you guys can go and download it, or if you have the Adobe Type Kit, you can find it on there. I cut these at 0.3 inches in height, and then if I'm using an O or a G or an S or something like that, I round them within design space so that they fit perfectly on the keychains. You guys, the gold turned out absolutely beautiful, especially against the Blood Moon. I love this deep color red that this pulled through. I'm really looking forward to getting these all glossed up. I'm going to be using Mr. Resin UV Hard Type. This is a UV curing resin, so you can see I have my UV curing light up in the corner of the screen, and I am just going to put the UV resin onto the front and the back of each one of the keychains, spread it out with a silicone brush. But I'm also going to drop in a little bit of gold chunky glitter on top of this. And I'm just going to be using Blessed by NMO. Of course, using all of her things today. And I'm just very lightly dusting it on top and then pressing it down with my silicone brush so that it actually gets into the epoxy, taking my heat gun, going over the top of it to remove any air bubbles that might have caused. And then I'm putting it underneath the UV light and I'm going to cure it for 3 minutes. Once the front is cured, we are going to flip the piece over and do the exact same process to the back. We're going to put the UV resin on. We're going to sprinkle it a little bit with the Blessed Chunky Glitter Mix. We're going to press that glitter down into the UV resin, hit it with a heat gun a little bit to make sure that everything is even, and then slide it back under the UV light for another 3 minutes to fully cure. Once that is done, it's going to be all nice and glossy and we will be able to put the hardware on. And you guys, we have created these beautiful custom keychains. In order to get my hardware on, I use a 0.8 millimeter Dremel. This is just a hand Dremel. It's nothing fancy. And then I use these keychain hardware pieces that I actually got on Amazon. If I can find the link for them, I will, but I think I've had these for like over 2 years. When it comes to actually putting the hardware onto the keychain, I prefer to place the hardware on the side of larger letters. So one side of the K is gonna be heavier than the other side of the K, and I think it just hangs better, it looks better, especially when taking photos or like it's actually on a keychain with keys. I love it to be on the side. Of course, that's a personal preference. So if you want to put your keychain hardware on top of the K, go for it. But I'm gonna put mine on the side and I'm going to add a little dot of UV resin to the side of it. And I'm going to smear this out so that the whole side is nice and glossy, clean it up, and then cure it again. Now it's just time to put on our hardware. And guys, we're rounding out the end of this. Oh my goodness, these keychains are absolutely fabulous. I love them. If you're planning on trying anything out like this for Valentine's Day or just anytime throughout the year, whenever you find this video, let me know. Tag me on social media so that I can see your guys' creation. I am always at the Little Sparkle Barn. Also, a huge shout out to Nicole Moret for sending me all of these beautiful products to showcase for you guys on these keychains today. If you do shop with her, shop my link below or find her at nmoshop.com. I had so much fun with you guys today. I'll catch you next time. Bye.